Hi, everybody. This is Matthew Waring, and I'm here again today with my partner, Brian Dunmire. And together we are Fairway Law Group, Florida divorce law firm, two offices, one in Orlando, one in South Florida. We take cases all over the state, not the panhandle yet, working on that. But this is another episode of Divorce Well in Florida. And the topic today is parenting in two households. We've talked before about child custody involved during the divorce process, but we haven't talked about it after the divorce process. If you have minor kids, you get divorced, you're going to have a parenting plan. That parenting plan is going to become a court order, and that court ordered parenting plan is going to be the constitution that governs how you, your former spouse, and your children interact until they reach the age of majority, which could be 18 or 19, depending on the circumstances. So, probably the biggest example to use of how to not co-parent after a divorce, like what you want to avoid, is our federal government. As of the time of recording this podcast right now, our government is shut down. The American people are basically like the kids, and basically the way Congress is running is post-divorce. You've got two political parties, and they're the two parents, and they're not cooperating. They're not co-parenting very well. They haven't for a very long time. There's a lot of bad consequences, and it affects the American people, i.e. the kids. That is not how you want to co-parent. You want to be flexible, and you want to be collaborative, and you want to work together to get stuff done. And you don't want to try to be a one side gets all, winner takes all strategy. That is not going to be good for the kid.
Yeah, co-parenting is definitely a big change. We've talked about it before that divorce results in a lot of changes. The sooner that you're able to grasp that or to accept it, you might be upset, it might cause you some depression or anxiety, but the sooner that you can at least just acknowledge the concept that there's going to be changes, the more you can start to mentally moving through that. And there's no better example than co-parenting. You've lived, whether it's been for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years in the same household, and whether your kids are 6 months old or 10 years old, you've lived together and parented together these kids. And maybe it's been a little bit less than ideal. Obviously, if you're getting divorced, you and your spouse might not be getting along. But at the end of the day, you're going to take co-parenting in a single house as a married couple, and you're going to almost certainly, in 99.9% of cases, switch to co-parenting in two separate households, which has a lot of very obvious logistics and not so obvious logistics that are going to have to be worked out. Who's picking the kids up from school? Who's taking them to soccer practice? Who's taking them to doctor's appointments? What happens if mom can go to a routine doctor's appointment, but dad can't? Things of that nature. So there's going to be a lot of changes. The absolute best thing, and this certainly does not occur in all cases by any stretch of the imagination, but the absolute best thing is to separate out your disdain for your spouse, whether you have disdain or not. There are people who get divorced who just don't get along and everything's fine, but there is a lot of emotions in a lot of cases. So the best thing that you can do is separate your disagreements with your spouse as it relates to your relationship with them. And you don't have to take them out to dinner, you don't need to take them out for Valentine's Day. Put that over here and say, okay, we can fight or not fight over as much as we want over here, but when it comes to the kids, we have to adopt a unified front and put them first. Never bring them into our fighting, bickering, whether legitimate or illegitimate. You remember that this is about the children, not about who's going to get the couch or whatever it might be. There are plenty of people who do that, and there are plenty of people who don't. But that would be takeaway number one that I would say is try and separate out the two. You don't even have to like your spouse to admit that they're not a bad parent. They might not parent exactly how you parent, but if they're a decent parent, try and get along with them as it relates to co-parenting.
Yeah, we've said it before. Divorce is not ending your family when you get divorced. You're restructuring it. but there's going to have to be a lot of flexibility involved, and there's going to have to be a lot of very good communication involved, because you're still a team. You're raising these children. It takes teamwork. And even if you're divorced and even if you hate each other, you're still a team when it comes to those kids. Just like you might go to an office, you might go to a job, and you might hate your coworkers, you might hate your boss, but you put that aside because you're at work and you're trying to get a goal accomplished. Whatever it is that you do, you have a job and you're trying to get it done. And you might have to work with people that you don't like, but you put that aside to get the job done. And that's what you're doing in when you're co-parenting after a divorce. Children are not a negotiation tactic. Children are not strategy. Time sharing with kids is not leverage. You don't use access to your kids to punish your former spouse. You don't talk negatively to your children about your former spouse to try to engender some sort of bias or prejudice to try to get your kids on your team. Your kids are not on anybody's team. Your teammate is your former spouse. That's the team. The kids and how they turn out and how they're raised, that's the goal of what the team is trying to work towards. You and the kids are not on the same team. You and your former spouse are. If you don't like it, it's too bad, because you had kids together. The consequences of having kids together is that you two are going to be teammates until the children are no longer minors. Once they grow up and they're adults, the team dissolves to a certain extent. But while the children are minors, especially when they're younger, the kids are not on your team. Your team is your former spouse. Your goal is to raise those children the best way you can. And you, as a parent, have to be the adult. And you have to put the children's interests first. And that means communicating with your former spouse. That means adhering to the parenting plan. That means continuing to hold up all of your obligations under the negotiated parenting plan that you have. Both sides need to do it. It also means being flexible, because the other parent might not parent the same way that you do. And that's okay. You can't control how they parent. And you're not going to be able to control how they're parenting when the child is at their house. As long as the child is not in danger or an abuse or neglectful situation, if we're just talking about a difference in parenting style, you're going to have to let that slide. And you're going to have to be a good teammate and be flexible, because that's how good co-parents operate. And that's how you're going to likely raise your child in a way that doesn't create too much harm as a result of a divorce.
Yeah. One of the lines that I will continually say to clients, if there's some sort of custody dispute, or if we're talking about custody, is one day, Matt, myself, the attorneys at our firm, we're going to stop representing you at the end of your divorce. And we're going to go our separate ways. We're going to shake your hand or tell you congratulations, and we're all going to go on our separate ways. But if your kid's 2 years old, for 16 years, you're going to be dealing with your spouse. You're going to be dealing with your husband. You're going to be dealing with your wife. So, yeah, the divorce is going to be done. The home that you own together is going to be split up, or however it resolves. The 401ks are going to be split up. But for 18 years, you're going to have to co parent with your spouse. And again, that doesn't mean that you all have to go out to a romantic dinner on Valentine's Day or anything like that. But inevitably, there will always be a situation where you have to stay at work late, or you get sick, or there's a last minute work trip or whatever, on both ends of the equation, both you and your former spouse. And you want the relationship as it relates to you and your spouse and the children to continue on and be workable. If you catch the flu on a Tuesday, you want to be able to send them a text and say, "Hey, I'm so sorry, I've got the flu. Do you mind watching the kiddos for a couple of days while I recover?" Ideally, what you want back is, "Yeah, no problem, like happy to do it," or whatever. What you don't want is, "Nope, it's your parenting time. You got to figure it out." And because that serves no purpose whatsoever. That's just to make lives miserable. And if you're dealing with that for 12, 13, 10 years, 8 years, however long it is after the divorce, I mean, that's just where you start having to go back to court for failing to abide the parenting plan and things of that nature. So in a perfect scenario, you can separate between your personal feelings towards your spouse and viewing your spouse as somebody else who's taking care of your kids. And some practical considerations as it relates to that is if they're 5 minutes late before pickup, don't file a motion for contempt. Because number one, a judge is going to shrug their shoulders and say, why did you think this was a good idea? And don't be too trigger happy if there's some sort of violation of the parenting plan, especially right out of the gate. I hear it all the time, like, oh, I know that this is going to continue happening, so I want to send a message at the beginning so my husband follows the parenting plan or whatever. I don't necessarily agree with that. There certainly are scenarios where that's appropriate, but every case is different. Generally speaking, extend some olive branches, try and work together. If after 6 months you can't work together, then revisit it. The last thing that you want is, I always use the example of an insurance contract. If you've ever looked at your insurance contract, whether it's for your homeowners, automobile insurance, any sort of insurance, commercial insurance, those are crazy. They're documents that will be 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 pages long. And clause 1437 says if this occurs, reference this addendum and da 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 da, right? Like, we can create parenting plans that are that granular that say if this and that, if that, then this. But that ideally is not what you want. Okay. You want something more general in a parenting plan, week on, week off, 223, whatever. If husband's going to be late to pick up the kids from soccer practice, he'll let wife know, whatever it might be, to allow a bunch of flexibility here and there. That's not going to occur in every case. There absolutely are cases where one spouse might have problems or some criminal stuff going on or whatever it might be. Those are different. In that scenario, it might be something where we've got to have something more in line or more safety focused or something along those lines. But for some extremely high percentage of cases, whether it's 50% or 80%, I don't know the exact number, but some sort of general parenting plan, which is still going to be pretty granular. It's going to end up being 7, 8 pages long or something. But some general parenting plan, hey, this is the schedule, work together if you need to change it. That's going to be best.
Yeah, a lot of problems that we see post divorce. Maybe they did the divorce themselves. Maybe they went through like a divorce mediator before filing and they got a parenting plan that way, or they kind of grabbed a form off the internet and filled it out themselves. We see those people after the divorce often coming back and saying that the parenting plan isn't working because the parenting plan doesn't talk about how we're going to handle holidays or how we're going to handle exchange points. Maybe somebody's during their time sharing, they're dropping the kids off with the grandma and they're not actually exercising their time sharing. And none of that is actually spelled out in the original parenting plan. And that can create a lot of problems too. So a vague parenting plan, even if you have good intentions, even if you and your former spouse want to work well and you guys are both aligned that we need to focus on what's in the best interest of the kids, if the plan is too vague or too abbreviated, then you're kind of setting yourself up for litigation because there's going to be things in there that are confusing. You guys are not going to see eye to eye. You're going to want additional terms in there. And so a lot of times with the initial parenting plan, you really want to invest the time during the actual divorce case to get the parenting plan done right, because you're going to live with that parenting plan. It's going to be the Constitution that's going to govern how you interact with your kids until they're 18. If you got a 3-year-old kid, you got 15 years to live under this parenting plan. And they are very, if not impossible, to modify. So there are modification provisions in the Florida statutes. You can modify parenting plans, but the standard and the threshold to try to get a judge to agree to allow you to modify is very high. They're often the most time consuming and expensive cases that we handle. You do not want to be in a position where you're needing to modify a parenting plan. You really want to put the time and effort in and put the thought in to getting it done right the first time. But I do also concur with Brian that in your parenting plan, even a very well thought out, a very good quality parenting plan, you need to bake in some flexibility. You do not want rigid pickup drop off times. Then what you're doing is you're drawing a lot of lines in the sand. And there's going to be a lot of lines that get crossed because, like I said, if you're parenting under a parenting plan for 15 years, And there's no flexibility built in. Nobody gets it right 100% of the time. Even NASA, SpaceX makes mistakes. They have brilliant engineers and they do all the math beforehand, and even they can make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And you do not want to have such a rigid parenting plan in place. You want it to be comprehensive. You want it to cover everything, but you don't necessarily want it to be rigid. You want it to be flexible. People need flexibility. And that goes on to what Brian was saying as well. You don't necessarily want to be the person that is trying to win their case or set themselves up for a modification by documenting the file, so to speak, with your co-parent. Every time that they show up late to a pickup, you don't need to send them a text message or an email confirming that they showed up late for a pickup. If you ever did need to enforce your agreement and you think that you're documenting your file or building your case, judges are going to see you as a parent who is just documenting the file to try to win a motion for contempt or set up a motion for contempt or enforcement case. The judge is not going to see you as a person who legitimately cares about their child and is trying to be a good teammate while parenting them with another person. The judge is just going to see you as somebody who's trying to document a file to try to win a case. That's not how you want to be perceived. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with documenting, so to speak, somebody else's violations, but you don't necessarily need to do confirming emails to the opposing party. That just builds friction. That doesn't help the team achieve the goal of raising the kids well.
Yeah. One thing to kind of get into is clients who think that they can get in front of a judge, explain their scenario and why they're the better parent. And there are absolutely scenarios that applies to. There's no question, again, if there's alcoholism, drug abuse, things like that. But at the end of the day, the Florida judges, generally what they're doing is there's a presumption of 50-50 timesharing in the state of Florida, which means that unless there's a reason not to, they should order 50-50. It doesn't always mean that they do or that they don't, but they should order 50-50 timesharing. So if this were to go all the way to some sort of trial or final hearing or even a temporary hearing, a judge is going to decide on a parenting plan on a schedule, week on, week off, 223, whatever it might be. And to a certain extent, the judge is going to hear what you have to say as it relates to extracurricular activities. If your kid's deeply embedded in travel baseballs, kind of something along those lines, or maybe your occupation, pilots are a great example where they typically get their schedules month by month. They'll know they'll have 12 or 13 days off per month, but they don't know in October what the days off are going to be, in September or November, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, the only thing at the highest level that the judge is going to be concerned about is the safety of the children. So, making sure that they're safe, making sure that they're not being exposed to extremely dangerous environments. Extremely dangerous environments does not mean that your husband or wife has one alcoholic drink in the evenings or anything like that, but rather, is there running water, things like that. Um, Roommates, do they have a criminal background, things like that. There are absolutely times that cases have to go to trial and have a judge determine issues because the two parties simply can't agree. That happens from time to time. But a judge isn't going to get into the extremely granular detail of whether the husband thinks that the kid can only eat organic lettuce and the wife is okay buying non-organic lettuce. Okay. That's a little bit of a silly example, but when you start arguing over things that granular or pedantic, you're going to lose the judge. The judge is not going to sit there and craft a 30, 40-page order discussing what organic materials can go into your kid's food, or the fact that you want to use Huggies diapers, but they're not certified free trade. The judge is not going to entertain those types of things. And honestly, for somewhat good reason, if they did that, then no cases would ever move along. We'd be so far caught into the weeds. They're going to be focused on the very high level things: school designation, week on, week off. How are we going to split Christmas? How are we going to split New Year's? How are we going to split spring break? Who's paying for the health insurance? How are we going to split extracurricular activities? I say that to kind of lead this into another high level thing to just always keep in mind. Anything that you can come to an agreement on is probably going to be better or easier to digest, even if it's not exactly what you want, than having a stranger in a black robe tell you what to do. If I tell you today that, you know, you have to go eat lunch at Texas Roadhouse or Outback Steakhouse or wherever, chances are you're gonna be like, man, why do I have to go do that? Versus you very easily could have just been like, yeah, I think I'm gonna go to Texas Roadhouse for lunch. And it's much easier to come to that agreement or to that finality if you are part of the process versus somebody telling you exactly what to do. So definitely try and stay flexible and keep in mind when you're drafting a parenting plan that it might not be exactly what you want, but at the end of the day, if your kids are healthy and being taken care of, it might be something worth considering.
Yeah. One thing is time with both parents is going to outweigh any value of any extracurricular anytime. So what we see a lot of times is, let's say moms get the kids during the week, dad gets them on weekends. The mom will register the kids in travel baseball or something like that, so that every weekend they have to go travel to a new destination and the kids get really invested in this team sport. And now the dad doesn't want to travel to these baseball games every weekend. The dad wants the kids with them. Dad doesn't like baseball. Dad wants to go fishing. But now these kids are hook, line, and sinker all in on this travel ball. And if they go to the dad's house on the weekend and they don't get to go play the game with their team, now dad looks like the bad guy. That is not good. Travel ball never wins. When the decision is time with mom or travel ball, or time with dad or travel ball, time with mom or dad trumps travel ball every day of the week, every day of the year. Unless you both agree and you're both all in on getting your kid into travel ball and both of you are going to participate, don't put the kid in travel ball. Don't put the kid in any type of traveling sports, anything that's going to take away from another parent's parenting time, or force the other parent into parenting time that it's not on their terms. When the child is with them, that parent gets to determine what they do during their time. You don't get to control what the other parent does with the kids when it's their time. You've got to let go. So another thing is, let's say when it comes to extracurriculars, a lot of parenting plans are going to say that both parents need to agree on any extracurriculars that the kids are going to participate in. And that's going to be things like team sports. It could be something like travel ball, whatever it is. And then it'll have some sort of ratio. Maybe one parent pays 70% of the extracurricular expenses. Maybe they split them 50-50. But let's say you get into a situation where child really wants to participate in some sort of extracurricular, and it's not going to detract away from time with their other parents. This is fair play. It might be after school on weekdays or something like that, but there's a cost to it. And let's say the other parent doesn't agree. Maybe they don't agree because they don't want their child to participate, or maybe they just don't want to agree because they don't want to pay any extra money. And that can be the case. But the parenting plan says that in order for the child to do an extracurricular, you have to agree and have to split costs. Well, maybe the other parent doesn't mind if you put the kids into that extracurricular. They just don't want to pay for it. Do you want to go out and spend $10,000, $15,000 litigating a motion for contempt and enforcement or a modification and wait 3 years for that case to resolve to get your kid into that extracurricular? Or are you just going to do it and cover the cost? A couple $100 a month, whatever it is. Some battles are not worth fighting when it comes to parenting plans. And then another thing that I'll say is, another major point of contention is, after the marriage, maybe each spouse is living on their own. They sell the marital home. Mom and dad are each living in their own apartments. They're doing 50-50 time sharing with the kids. Everything's great for a couple of years. And then dad gets a girlfriend that moves in. Mom doesn't like it. She doesn't want her kids around the new girlfriend. The new girlfriend doesn't necessarily have an egregious criminal record. It's just they're going to be interacting with the children a lot. Mom might not like that. See, the same thing both ways. Just depend. Maybe mom gets a new boyfriend. He moves in. She moves in with a guy. Dad doesn't like his kids over there going around this new guy that he doesn't know. Creates a lot of problems, creates a lot of contentions. But here's what's important to remember: the benefit of exclusivity over who is around your children, that is a benefit that you get when you're married. When you get divorced, you lose that benefit of exclusivity. When you get divorced, you have to understand at some point, I or my children's other co-parent are probably going to get into another relationship. There's going to be another man or woman involved in my children's lives at some point. That is something that you have to acknowledge and prepare for. Some people lose their marbles and they want to file modifications and they want to file motions for enforcement and the judges are going to realize that human beings are probably going to move on and begin new relationships. The best thing parents can do is bite the bullet, put aside your emotions, and meet the other person. Meet the new guy. Take the new guy out to lunch. Meet the new woman. Go over there and spend time with that person in front of the kids. Get to know them a little bit better. Spend time as a unit, all of you, around the kids, so the kids don't feel like they're being split between two factioning tribes. And if people can do that, then they're going to feel a lot safer with their kids going over there because now they know the person. Maybe you need to go out to lunch with the new boyfriend and the new husband once a month to touch base. Little things like that sound unconventional, but it's going to help you come to terms with your child or your children being around the other parent's new partner. And it's going to keep you out of court.
And no, you cannot put in the parenting plan that the girlfriend or the husband, new boyfriend can't be around the kids. There's case law on it. It's called paramour. It's because that's essentially an injunction saying that you can't hang out with who you want to hang out with. So it's not going to happen. Now, on the flip side of it, do not, under any circumstances, do not allow the kids to refer to that person as mom or dad. Okay. And certainly do not allow that person to say, I'm your new dad, I'm your new mom. Okay. That is something the courts aren't going to put up with. That can be worked into a parenting plan if needed. But just having a new boyfriend, girlfriend, that's not going to work into a parenting plan. That's not going to be worked into a final judgment. Of course, there's exceptions for everything. But when I say the exceptions, I'm talking like, I hate to even say it, but if they're a registered sex offender or something like that, that's a little bit different. But if they're just John Q. Public, they have a job, no major issues, they can be around your kids. Like Matt was saying, probably the best thing, if you can stomach it, is take them out to lunch, go grab a drink with them after work, coffee, whatever. Just explain like, hey, my kids are the most important thing in my life. And I understand you're going to be around them. Please just treat them with respect. And God willing, here's my phone number. If anything ever happens, please just reach out and let me know. I'll meet you at the emergency room. You don't need to be afraid to talk to me. That's ultimately what you want, right? Somebody who is, this might be a little tough to swallow, but loving your children as well and taking care of them without like replacing your role as the parent. So if the step parent is at home with the kid and the kid trips and falls on the concrete and busts a tooth or something like that, you would want that person to take the kid to the emergency dentist or the emergency room or whatever it is, and to text you or call you and say, hey, your son busted his tooth, so I'm taking him to this dentist. Please meet me there or let me know. Whatever the scenario is that you want, you're not going to be able to control it. So why make it any more difficult than it necessarily needs to be? Shifting gears to super high conflict cases. I said earlier about judges not necessarily taking the time to like really develop a parenting plan that works for you. Just remember that. I mean, we can ask for a day or 2 day trial or something along those lines, but at the end of the day, you're not going to get a parenting plan that outlines every single step of the road for the next 10, 15, 18 years, however long it might be. So just kind of remember that when you're in a high conflict scenario. And also just remember things might not be perfect. Your kid might be riding the school bus a little bit longer they need to, but Matt and I do a lot of reading about the psychology on kids, and there's certainly impacts on kids going through divorces. At the end of the day, if the kid knows that both of their parents are loving, caring, and supportive, that's going to be the largest factor that you can have with the children. That they know that they can call mommy if something happens, that they know they can call daddy if something happens, whatever it might be. So never lose track of that. But if you do find yourself in a high conflict situation, I'm going to be the first to tell you there's no crystal ball. Matt and I are not magicians. We cannot fix that, so to speak. That's going to be between you and the spouse, but there's a few things you can do. You certainly go to co-parenting sessions and participate in them. There are some courses on high conflict parenting. Whether they work or not is very fact dependent on you. Sometimes you hear it's like a little bit bureaucratic government course that just is like, don't fight. Other people think it's great. It just depends. There's parenting coordinators, nothing wrong with that. Somebody who might be able to help you on a week to week schedule. All those things cost money though. And especially if you don't have the resources for it, that's definitely something. But really, if you find yourself in an extremely high conflict parenting scenario, one thing would definitely be the co-parenting sessions. If you have any sort of health insurance, that should be not too unreasonably expensive. And you could do it online. I know there's websites out there that might be like $50 or something along those lines per session. So that's definitely something to keep in mind if you find yourself in a high conflict scenario.
Yeah, and there are situations where you're going to have to stand up for yourself and you're going to have to stand up for your kids. There's going to be situations where the other spouse is simply not following the parenting plan at all. You might have a week on, week off schedule and the parent doesn't return the child after a week. And you're in a situation where the person's just blatantly not following it, just completely disrespecting the parenting plan. There's going to be times when you have to do stuff about that. You might have to get a lawyer involved. And that's a lot of times when people call us and get us involved is when something like that has happened where it's not really something that can be worked out. It's a violation that's happened over and over and over again and it affects their parenting time. That's a problem. And that might be where you need to step in and file a motion for contempt and enforcement. There's certainly times to enforce the agreement. The best way to get a judge to take your case seriously and enforce your motion for contempt is if you are the reasonable person and you're doing everything in your power to de-escalate the situation, try to work it out with the other party, try to negotiate, try to come to terms, maybe try to offer co-counsel or co-parenting therapy to see if that works. And if the other spouse just still isn't biting after any of that, then you can file your motion for contempt and enforcement. And you can show the judge everything that you tried to do to work out this situation. And this is why now you need the judge to step in and help you. It's going to make the case a lot stronger. And a lot of times it's going to short circuit the necessity of even filing a case because the other spouse is going to be seeing that you're trying to cooperate. Maybe there's a little bit of give and take. Maybe you guys can work out whatever the problem is versus just running down to the courthouse and filing your petition right away. Ultimately, there are going to be situations where you got to stand up for you, for your kids, and you're going to have to file something. You might have to hire a lawyer. You might have to go to court. There might need to be a hearing. It happens. But you don't want to be seen as a litigious parent. You do not want to be seen as a parent who is racing down to the courthouse to file petitions for motions for enforcement and contempt over very minor violations. It has to be something legitimate. It has to be something that is occurring and recurring over time. It needs to be something that's worth the judge's attention in order for it to be a worthwhile case.
Yeah, do not under any circumstance, no matter how much you want to, even if your spouse has done it, do not interject your kids into the litigation between you and your spouse. Don't sit there and say, "Hey, mommy's trying to take daddy to court so that I don't spend as much time with you," or "Daddy and mommy are going to court because we can't figure out who's going to pick you up from school tomorrow." I'm going to go against all my rules here. ChatGPT it, what effect that has on the kids. ChatGPT, because what you're doing is you're parentifying, I believe is the phrase, your issues, okay? And you're making the child choose and handle it, even if that's your intent. Or to kind of take it out of the context of a parenting plan, because mommy and daddy are fighting, we're not going to live in our house anymore. So you're going to lose your bedroom that you really love. Don't do it. Just don't do it. What do you get for that as a human being? What do you get for that? Just don't. Even if your spouse does it, don't do it. They shouldn't. They should not. And judges should enforce that heavily. I've seen it before. Judges will get on you very quickly. Keep your kids out of the fight.
Yeah,
Just
when you do that, when you involve the kids in the fight or you try to talk poorly about the other spouse or the other parent, you're not making the kids lose respect for the other parent. You're making the kids lose respect for themselves. And that's all you're really doing is you're hurting their self-esteem. So you got to keep the kids out of it. The fight is not between the parents and the kids. The fight is between the parents that need to stay there. But with that said, this has been another episode of Divorce Well in Florida. We thank everybody for staying tuned. Remember to please like, rate, subscribe the show. It actually helps us out. And we'll be back for another episode next week.